All right, we learned some things this week, 5 of them, and we're kicking it off with Manly. Could they make a prelim run with Turbo, DCE, and Brooks flying? That was one of Brooks' best games of the season, and Turbo was back to some of his best work as well. And when DCE doesn't have to do everything, that's when this team goes really well. Their outside backs are looking really strong. You've got Tommy Talau, Lehigh Hopewade on that left-hand side who have a bit more flair than what they've had in the past, as much as I do love Brad Parker. The youthfulness, the speed is there, and that's what scares teams for sure. So that's been really helpful and really important. They do have Lockie Croker back, which I think overall will be important. It's going to take him a few weeks to get things going. Their middles are doing much better. Obviously with Nathan Brown in there, Paseka's back, and they're doing good things there in that one. Gerbo's there as well. So could they make a prelim run? I definitely think they can. I don't see them making the grand final or pushing the top couple of teams, but I do see them being able to go really well and have a good run there as well. So we'll look at the ladder very shortly and show you where they're at and how they can push themselves potentially to a home final and get themselves in an opportunity against one of the top 4. So we'll see how that goes. Could they shake it up and could they beat one of those top 4? The Cowboys, they don't have what it takes, sadly, is what I learnt definitively for round 23 there. They were just going on a run, is how I'm going to put that one. They were looking fairly good, having some good defensive games and showing that maybe they do. But this one on the weekend really just showed that they don't. Unfortunately, they just didn't play anywhere near as well as they needed to. Defensively, when you're up in a game like that, you shouldn't be letting a team that's coming 14th climb all over the top like that and just dominate you and win by almost 30 was just ridiculous. So, yeah, Cowboys could make the 8, but I do think they're a very likely chance of bowing out in that first game. And it could be up against a team like a Manly, who, are on a bit more of a run now than what the Cows are and look like they can go on a bit of a better run than what the Cows can. So very, very interesting, that whole situation. But they just, every second or third week, they show us something different, and that's not going to cut it, unfortunately, in the finals. And that's where people are like, oh, they could make a run, they could shock some teams, maybe one game. I can't see them doing it for back-to-back games there, unfortunately. Sharkies, they make a statement with an absolutely clinical performance. They sure did, that is for sure. To win 44-0 against the Titans, who have been playing really, really well away from home, just shows that they're getting on the right track. And that's exactly the kind of performance that they needed. Without their 2 starting halves in Hines and Trindle, Atkinson was able to control things and they were able to put in a real team performance. It was great to see guys like Oregon Kafusi, Tom Hazelton, Rudolph all have really good games. I'm not sure what that shows for the Titans side, but the Sharks just brought it way more. They were making 60 meters every set. They were pushing hard through the middle. And then we know they've got the gun outside backs. It's just been that middle that has struggled at certain times of every year. Earlier on the year was going flying when Oregon and Hazelton were crushing it. And that's when Rudolph was out as well. And moving on to now, they haven't played like this in a good 3 months. So if they can continue that in the next couple of weeks, then they can really cement themselves in that top 4 and give them an opportunity to make a run, at least get to a prelim and potentially shock one of these top teams, because they do have the firepower in those outside backs and they have a big forward pack. They just need to get rolling. And this week, they absolutely did. So the Sharkies are on notice, especially when Hines and or Trindle come back. If the forward pack can play like that, they can beat anyone. That's for sure. On their day, right? But everything has to go perfect and has to go right there for sure. So that was a big statement from the Sharks. The Dogs, they put themselves in the fight for the top 4 and potentially a home final if they come 5th or 6th. So very impressive win, obviously, against the Dragons, who needed to get a win themselves to stay clearly in that top 8. So it was a very disappointing week for obviously the Titans there, getting done to 44-0. The Cowboys losing to the Broncos by 24 after being up 18-6 or whatever it was. And then the Dragons losing by 18 at home to the Dogs, who are a good team, obviously, but they need to win this one. It was a very, very important one at that. And how fun was that Dolphins-Warriors game? We'll get into those scores a little bit later today after work. So, yeah, those 2 teams, very disappointing. But the Dogs, on the other hand, it was a really strong game, and they played great as well. And they put themselves in absolutely terrific position to get a home finals berth potentially there. So sitting in 5th at the moment, which is great. 1 point clear of the Eagles, who are in 6th, and then you got Cowboys 1 point behind that, and then another win clear of 8th there. So Dogs put themselves 4 points above the bottom part of the 8, which is great, and they're only 2 points behind that of Roosters and the Sharkies in 3rd and 4th spot. So if they go on a nice run to end this year, and they do have the team to potentially do it, and obviously the run to potentially do it as well. The Sharkies have a pretty solid run there as well, but you can see there the Dogs play the Dolphins next week. Sharkies play the Knights, and then Roosters up against the Eels, which would be a pretty fun clash, to be fair. But if one of those teams drop a game there, it could push the Bulldogs up onto equal points, just a little bit behind on differential at the moment, unfortunately. But they're in a great position there to at least hold on to a 5th or 6th and get a home final there, which is great. But Storm 2 points clear of the Panthers at the top of the ladder there, 38-36, into the Roosters and the Sharkies. So that top 2 is set. It's just which team is going to finish first. And I'm not sure if it actually really matters, to be fair. Minor premiership these days, someone asked the question and I was like, I don't think so. I think people just care about premierships. People care about making the top 4. People care about making the top 8, 2nd and 3rd to premierships. And then minor premiership, I think, is last on teams' lists. Like, it's not something something they do care about a little bit. It's cool to have that kind of silverware. We were minor premiers, but no one talks about the Panthers. They were minor premiers and they lost that year, 4 years ago now. No one cares about that one. They only care about the premierships that followed. So yeah, very interesting, that one. A few people saying as well, obviously the Roosters, are they going to be able to rest any of their players? And it's probably not, because they're going to be fighting for a top 4 spot. If they lose any of the next 2 games, they're really going to be pushing. If Sharks and Dogs are winning still, they'll be fighting for this 4-5 spot. So they probably won't be able to rest at all unless it gets to the final round. But we know that when they do play the Rabbitohs in that final round, the teams never seem to rest any of their players. It's a very much a grudge match, a rivalry, and a lot of pride in playing that match. So yeah, it's going to be interesting for some of those players as well. Guys like Teddy, guys like Watson that I own potentially as well. And then you go down, obviously, as I said, Eagles, Cowboys, and the Finns. That massive win for Dolphins keeps them in the 8. Otherwise, they would have been down here with the Knights, unfortunately. So Finns in there at 8th. And then the Dragons and the Knights in there with Raiders on that 24 and 26 points. So really, the top 8 should be fairly close to set, most likely, unless the Cowboys kind of shit the bed here. Some potential moves between that final 4 teams in Dolphins, Dragons, Knights, Raiders, and if Cowboys struggle a little bit here over the next bunch of weeks. So very, very interesting, that ladder situation, as always, with 4 rounds to go, which is cool. Fantasy tip of the week to finish things off. Last week, we spoke about a lot of the mid-range players did really well. Yeah, there was injuries that have caused these guys to get important roles, and it demonstrates the importance of being able to hold sometimes where luck comes in. In this week, the mid-range didn't work as well, which made looping important. Very important. Unfortunately, that, it didn't, for the most part, didn't create some crazy discrepancies as much as last week. But it was important to have the options to loop, because some of those guys went 30, went 25, went 7 in a Sorensen, these types of guys here. So keep that in mind for the next 4 weeks, having that looper and being able to loop with some of those mid-range guys, because they could get you 20, they could get you 60. And that's a big discrepancy, obviously. So look to guys in form now if you are going to make a trade. That's been the problem in the last bunch of weeks. This week especially, you had, or the last couple of weeks, people brought in a Jaden Campbell. People have brought in, Reed Marnie in the last, 2-3 weeks ago. Is a guy that just, hit a low score. And then now we found out that over the last bunch of weeks, he's been dealing with a shoulder problem, which is not great. Jaden Campbell has gone into a bit of a lull over the last few weeks. So if you bought him this week, you bought him knowing that he's in a bit of a down little period. So when you're coming into this last 4 weeks, you want to be jumping onto guys that are in clear form. Colin Matangi this week, we knew his minutes were going to be dropping over the last few, so that hurt him there. But buying him 6 weeks ago was the right play. Starling was super unlucky this week, but making sure you bought him 3 or 4 weeks ago when he was in the clear form of his life, or scoring of his life anyway, was the play. And not jumping on guys that are have potential for a bounce back. 3 or 4 weeks ago, Isaac Tungo. It's still only a short period of time there, 6-7 weeks, to turn form around and get things right. And thankfully, he's got Nathan Cleary next to him, and that's finally paid off this week. But you've had to wait for it. And there's some of those players that you bring in that aren't currently in form. You're hoping for a bounce back, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And you go a couple of weeks in a row with low scores, and you finally get a good one, but you could have just jumped on someone else who had a really nice, clear runway of a spot in the side, or their team's on fire and they're doing good things. So just keep that in mind for this last 4 weeks for players and teams that are in form and doing good things. So thank you for being here for the 5 things I learned for the week, the fantasy tip of the week as well. You're all legends, and we'll catch you in the last 2 games analysis.